All right, welcome to the March 2nd meeting of the North Andover Finance Committee. I see that we have a quorum, so we will begin, and I believe we're starting with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if everyone wouldn't mind standing. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thank you all for being here. We are into the heart of it now. So we got pledges. So let's start with Stan Limpert's favorite part of the meeting. Is there any public comment? All right.
You shouldn't do that.
No, I'm good with it.
Stan Limpert, 43 Stonecleve Road. Since I won't have a chance to do it again, I just wanted to compliment Lori Burzlaff and her committee for an excellent final report for the Facilities Master Plan 2 effort. That's one of the best reports, municipal reports I've seen done in this town. I think it's clear, comprehensive. I think it really helps us a lot kind of come up with a plan going forward. So I really wanted to compliment her and her group on a job well done.
Good. Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Stan. All right. I am not seeing any other folks for public comment, so we can move on to discussion with two of our favorite people, the Finance Director and Town Manager, on Facilities Master Plan 2 and the fiscal year 23 budget. So, Madam Town Manager, I will throw it over to you, and we can go at your pace. We can happily throw questions at you in the middle of it, save them till after, whatever you would like.
You may as well ask them as we go.
All right.
And then if there's more at the end, we'll handle those too.
Fair enough.
Let me know when you can say.
Cannot. Can. Yep.
All right.
We're good.
So many of you may have already seen this presentation. I'm going to keep giving it though, because that's how we educate everyone on it. So we've got a lot of people here tonight who have been involved in Facilities Master Plan 2, whether it was on the subcommittee for the school capacity part of it, or they worked on the working group, or they were in the meetings today for the MSBA. And I know you have heard kind of initial conversations on it, but we've made some progress since then. So we did want to update you on where we are with it. So Facilities Master Plan 2, and our new tagline is building on success, because that's what we're doing. And one thing we wanted to do as Facilities Master Plan 2 is just remind people about where we've been. So Facilities Master Plan 1 was a report that was completed in 2012. And the final project will be completed in fiscal year 23, and that is the Senior Center. It's slated for a February 2023, is Andrew, opening. So we're very excited. If you've driven by there, you'll see we have steel.
Good.
Yeah, we're pretty excited. So that will be the end of Facilities Master Plan 1, right as we're jumping into Facilities Master Plan 2. It brought forward a recommended scenario which included 7 buildings for a total of between $24 and $26 million at that time. As you can see, the final cost of construction was actually more like $45 million. The plan was for the former police station to become the school administration building, the senior center to expand on its current site, the Kittredge gym, new fire station, the Main Street conversion to town offices, school classrooms, and the DPW garage. And the reason that I kind of mention this is that the final plan looked different, right? We ended up including town hall. We did the ABECC. We changed sites for some projects, right? If you look at Facilities Master Plan 1, the senior center was going to be right there in its current footprint, and now it's not, right? So the Facilities Master Plan is just that. It's a plan, and it's going to change. It's going to change annually. And I just want to remind people of that. Bless you. All right, so this is what you've seen before, the recommended order of projects. This has not changed. We start with the middle school and the Kittredge at this town meeting. You'll see those first appropriations. Next is the fire station, the Franklin Gymnasium, the Atkinson School, the Youth Center, the Franklin School for the rest of their project, and then the ABECC. We're still recommending it in that long-term 15-year plan, but we seem to have built a lot of consensus around that now. And we've talked a lot about how that can change with new revenues, with different sources, with grants, as we move forward. The reason we picked this plan is that it addresses the middle school first. It was one of the first things Superintendent Gilligan said to me. We have a big issue at the middle school. It reflects the MSBA funding for Kittredge, which if you haven't heard, today we were invited into the first part of the process.
Yeah.
So exciting.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Kudos to the amazing team. We have a lot of work to do, especially over the next 270 days. But it's going to be a huge benefit to actually making this plan a reality. It puts the first most expensive project at the beginning to avoid that escalation cost, right? We all know that we have to account for escalation. We saw in Facilities Master Plan 1. We thought it was going to cost $24 million. It cost almost twice that, right? So we need to realize that, and we need to build the more expensive projects first. It uses our decreasing debt to our advantage. We're matching project costs to our increased capacity, reducing the burden on taxpayers. So, why this timeline again? It works financially today. It's easiest if we plan for 5 years, but again, it's flux. It can change, and it will change. And one thing that I said to the school committee, and then they all made fun of me, and I said I felt a little bit like the Ted Lasso of North Andover, but we can't let perfection get in the way of progress. Like, we're getting there. And it may not be as fast as anybody wants. It may not be in the order that everyone loves, but we're making so much progress. So I'm just asking everyone to try to continue to work with us towards that. So as far as the projected cost, the total cost of the project in today's dollars, and that's all in, everything, like we said, design, construction administration, technology, fixtures, these chairs, the operating costs in the future, everything, the staffing, all of it, in today's dollars is $139 million. Over the period of the 15 years, it's 166, almost 167 million. The design is about 12 million, the construction 151 million, and then the new operating cost, staff, benefits, electricity, is about 3.6 million. You'll see when we talk about today's budget that even though the senior center is opening in February of 2023, we have to start accounting for those utilities in next year's budget, right? And so there's new costs that come on because of that new building. And so we wanted to plan for that and be realistic about that when we're bringing this plan forward. What we did for inflation is 5% per year for construction and 3% per year for inflation for operating. 3% is around what we see for our operating costs. 5% construction is pretty standard, unfortunately, right now.
Yeah.
So the plan for the design funding, for the middle school, it's an appropriation from the operating budget. We're going to be using a combination of the Amazon new growth that we talked about at our last meeting, as well as we're using some of the debt capacity that we've been saving. So if you remember correctly, we've been talking about how we created this kind of savings account within our own budget because we had debt falling off. We didn't want it to get gobbled up. So we're going to be using some of that as well. For Kittredge, we're going to be doing an appropriation from the operating budget as well, using that new growth as well as some free cash. And in future years, we have it as a combination of the debt capacity coming off, free cash in the capital stabilization account that you all have been helping us create and fund over the last few years. For the construction, for fiscal year 24, the middle school build would be capacity within the levy. So we've actually cobbled together enough capacity that we won't need an exemption. We'd be able to do that right through the levy. For fiscal year 25, we had built out 2 scenarios. Now we're going to go with the MSBA scenario. We're going to do the work. We're going to get it done. And so that would be with the MSBA and capacity within the levy, Amazon new growth. For fiscal year 26, the fire station would be capacity within the levy. Fiscal year 26, again, with the Franklin Gym, would be debt capacity reserve. So again, we have that debt capacity coming off. We're saving it again, and we may as well use it, right? We don't want it to get gobbled. Let's use it to build something. So we'll actually essentially be using cash on hand to build that gymnasium. For fiscal year 28, the Accident and the Youth Center, 7.4 million of that would be in the levy, and 23.9 million would be excluded from an override. For fiscal year 35, Franklin, 19 million in the levy, and that 18 million could either be post-TIF Amazon new growth. So again, the TIF would be falling off at that point, and we could capture that new growth then to put towards this debt or a debt exclusion. It's hard. Fiscal year 35 feels like a million years away, so it's hard to commit to that one thing, but we would have options. And then fiscal year 36, ABECC, we could again do that within the levy.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
And you said, is it okay to ask questions?
Absolutely, yes.
So with the Kittredge and the MSBA scenario, what happens if that doesn't end up coming through? And I guess it's part of it is ignorance about the process and how sure of a thing it is. At this point, I know it was a huge success to get through this milestone, but if for some reason it doesn't go through and we don't get it, then does that impact the capacity within the levy, like sort of waterfall down in the future years?
So we have a Plan B. And the Plan B would be to use exclusions.
Okay.
We hate Plan B. We love Plan A.
I do too.
So our plan is to work as hard as we can to make sure we make all the deadlines, that we work well with MSBA, and to try to secure this funding. We sat on the call today, and there was one community who was giving back their funding. They were withdrawing because they hadn't met their deadlines or they had changed their mind about their projects. We don't want to be that community.
So is it at this point, as long as you hit the deadlines, we get the funding? Is that?
Every single time there's a vote. So they have to vote over and over and over again. Yep. So
That's
we have to make
painful.
sure that we're doing all the right things, doing a good job, getting a good consultant on.
But just to piggyback on Jen's question, as long as we're hitting the marks and doing what we're supposed to be doing, we anticipate
Yes.
that a vote would be affirmative.
Yep.
Right,
To the point where I've taken all of the maybes out of my presentation.
there you go, that,
Great.
thank you.
So.
Thanks.
If I can ask a question as well? I know this is pretty far out, but for Atkinson and Youth Center, why would that be an override as opposed to a debt exclusion?
So I call it an override. It's the same
Okay,
thing.
okay.
Yeah. But it would be excluded then.
Okay, thanks.
And I will get a little bit into what an override versus debt exclusion is, and I've used the words interchangeably here,
Okay,
but it would be
okay.
an exclusion.
I didn't know if it was just my misunderstanding
No,
of the
not
difference
at all.
between the two, but okay, thank you.
And then, so the question is, why are we doing that? How are we doing this with so few debt exclusions? And, the chair was on the call today, and one of the speakers said, I know so many of you are going to be doing this with debt exclusions. Their projects, and we're able to do
Yeah.
Kittredge without debt exclusion, which is amazing. And so, we're very lucky that we've planned for it this way. And it's been kind of twofold. And so a debt exclusion, for those people that don't know, it allows a temporary increase to the levy to pay just for that specific debt. Right? And then once that debt is paid off, whether it's 20 years, 25 years, that increase to the levy just goes away. It's not like a regular override where the increase is forever, right? So the way that we're doing that is because we've saved that capacity, because over the last 3 years we've seen that debt falling off, and we were like, wait, hold on to it. We've got Facilities Master 2 coming. But additionally, we have $72 million in capacity coming off over a 5-year period. And if we're diligent and committed, we can continue to grab that money and implement this plan. And that will give us a huge advantage because we'll be keeping our debt level, right? And it's what we want to do. We don't want to see huge spikes in our debt because that makes taxpayers' bills go up exponentially, right? We want to keep things level. And so if we can continue to do that, we can have great success with this program. Additionally, under this plan, all of the new operating costs, the $3.9 million, it's all through new growth. So we won't have to do any operating overrides at all, which should be great. So, we talked a lot about the impact to the average single-family home and what that impact looks like. And I think, I look at my own tax bill, right, and I hear about projects that are being built in my town where I live, and that's what I worry about, right? What's it going to look like for me? So, with the MSBA funding, this proposed plan, it cost the average single-family home taxpayer $5,915 over a period of 30 years. So fiscal year 28 to fiscal year 34, it would be $158 a year. Fiscal year 35 to fiscal year 62, $274 a year. And then from fiscal year 54 to fiscal year 57, it would be $116 a year. And this assumes about a 3% interest rate, which actually might be a little bit higher from what we typically would see as a AAA bonded community, in a 25-year bond. And this also does take into account the fact that we do have some exempt debt coming off as well. So basically, when that exempt debt comes off of the high school, I absorbed that into the costs. So if we had the MSBA, now that we've been accepted, the first 5 years of the plan actually has no cost to the taxpayer, and that would include the middle school, the Kittredge, the fire station, and the Franklin gym. Obviously, you would have your regular operating increases, your regular 2.5%, any value increases that you typically would have, but this plan would not cost the average taxpayer anything to implement. And you know what, the meeting we had originally with the school committee and the select board, there was a lot of conversation, what would happen if we moved up the AB ECC and the Franklin, it feels like a really long time away. And so we did look at that, and you can see that it almost doubles the cost to the average taxpayer. And that's because we no longer can take advantage of the capacity that's opening, right? So it would cost $9,499 over a period of 30 years. It ranges from $80 to $410 a year, and unfortunately, the $80 at the end would be an override to cover the operating costs, so that would be a permanent increase.
Yeah.
And this would put Franklin in 30 in ABECC in fiscal year 31. And I will just mention too that if you watched the select board meeting Monday night, I'm sure you all did, because it's riveting television, but we are brainstorming, and Mr. Mealy particularly is brainstorming some solutions for the ABECC that may solve some of their space problems in the short term while we get towards that end period. Okay, so the other thing that we talked a little bit about is what a bill has just looked like for the regular single-family house in North Andover. So this is a house on Liberty Street. And the value of this home is $595,700, which is our average single-family house. And thanks to our assessor, Bill Mitchell, because without him, I would never have been able to do this. But he created this lovely chart for me. And then what I went ahead and did was figured out that it increased an average of $250 per year. And this was a house that had not seen any huge valuation changes, no permits had been pulled, and it had not seen a sale, right? Because any of those things could cause
Would
a huge
change,
change,
yeah.
right? So this was just your average house typically goes up about $250 a year. This is what we saw. So you can see that, you know, their bill since 2013, their bill was $5,836. In 2022, their bill was $8,090, okay? So then what I went and did was I looked at what the next 12 years would look like, right? And how this program would impact them. And I looked at that proposed program as we had proposed it originally, and then this accelerated program with the ABECC and the Franklin moved
up,
up, right? Because I think it was a really important conversation for us to have. And so you can see basically what it would do to someone's bill over the next 12-year period. We did the accelerated program. Over the 12-year period, it would be an additional $4,734.
Does this take into account anticipated increases just based on the valuation of the houses and real estate going up? I mean, we've all seen what's happened in the market recently, so I'm curious.
So what we did was, this house has seen regular normal valuation changes, right? So it's seen the regular ebbs and flows that any normal single-family house has. So it does.
Okay.
It's impossible to do it for anyone's house, so we have to kind of do it in a vacuum. But it's what the average house has seen. I mean, interestingly, I could do it for anyone's house. Like if someone was curious what they looked like, you know what I mean? They were like, hey, what did I look like for the last 10 years? What do you think? You know, we could.
There's a sign-up sheet on the side.
Yeah, I mean, we could do it. Well, I say I could do it, but I really need Bill.
He's shaking his head. He's shaking his head no.
And he's in the middle of abatements, which are due February 1st, so I'm sure he's thrilled that I'm volunteering him for this task. But, you know, it's an interesting tool. It's an interesting study to look at, for sure. So, you could see, like in 2016, the bill went down, right? It went down $80, you know, and valuations have certainly changed from 2013 to 2022. But remember that your tax bill is really kind of like a scale, right? So while your values may have increased, your rate is going down. And when your rate is increasing, your value is going down, right? So you're really seeing it kind of in that scale way. So it's certainly interesting.
I think you should ask Bill to build like a model template and put it on the website, and then the whole town can just go in and.
Yeah, like an app.
Right, yeah, like an app. Oh, an app, there you go.
We'll have it ready tomorrow at noon, right, Bill?
Well, welcome to the Finance Committee, Bill.
Don't tempt him, because he's amazing and could probably have it done in like 10 minutes. It would take me 8 years. So the other thing I just wanted to review was just overrides and exclusions. And I think this is important because we have some new members. And I think people at home, we haven't done an override in a really long time here, right? So it's not something that we've talked about in a long time. And I just think it's a good refresher. So like I said before, an override is a permanent increase to the levy forever. The only way to get rid of an override is to do an underride. It's for a municipal operating budget. It has to be for a municipal purpose. An exclusion, it could be for debt, or it could just be for a single capital project. So we could say, this year, we want to buy a fire truck, and instead of using free cash or taking a bond, we want to do an exclusion to buy the fire truck. It's temporary until that project or debt is paid. They both require a question to be collected on the election ballot by the select board. The select board is the only people who can place an override or an exclusion question on a ballot. It cannot be a citizen petition, it can't be another committee or commission, it can only be the select board. It can happen either before or after town meeting. I generally advise it to happen after town meeting, because then you know if it's even past town meeting. One, you're not wasting the money on having an election, but two, town meeting can be a great educational tool for people to learn what the override's about. Local officials cannot publish or provide voter information materials at public expense. So we can't create flyers that say, go vote for the override, right? We're not allowed to do that. It's also really important to note, and I just keep repeating it, that the proposed plan does not require any override votes. And it does require exclusion votes, but not until fiscal year '28. And I just want to reiterate that this year, the only thing we're doing is appropriating design funding. And for Kittredge, it's actually only partial portion of it. We're going to save the rest at town meeting. So the two very simple appropriations this year, there's no election, there's no override, and they're both just a majority vote. So the next steps for Facilities Master Plan 2, this week on Monday, we released the report, which was exciting. We're having a town hall meeting on North Andover GovCAM to introduce the report to residents on April 4th. You'll be able to call in or email us questions. We have found, you guys are going to be shocked, people don't like to come to meetings. So if we go and we do it that way, people tend to come and participate with us, so we're going to do it that way. I say it's like the Santa show, and I get to be Mrs. Claus, and Superintendent Gilligan's going to be Santa, and it's going to be good. So definitely tune in. Town meeting will kick off the process. Again, just let them vote. And just a reminder that every project needs individual approval. So every single year, we are going to be revisiting Facilities Master Plan 2 as part of our capital improvement program. And if you look, and you can ask Lynn and she'll tell you, from 2012 until this year's capital improvement program, there has been a line item that says Facilities Master Plan 1 that has changed. We have to visit it every year because the needs change, the amounts change, and so we will continue to be looking at this all the time. And that's it.
All right. So, does anybody have any additional questions? No? Comments? I'd like to make a comment. Go,
I just
please.
have to say this is absolutely amazing that we can do so much
Yeah.
without having an override until really far out. I mean, kudos to you guys for an amazing planning process to be able to put the puzzle pieces together to achieve this. This is, I mean, unbelievable, really.
So
Very
that's what
well
I was
done.
going to say. The fact that you've been able to put this together with such, manageable impact on taxpayers, I think we would all want it to happen now, right? But it can't. I think, as we think more about it, we understand that. I think the plan that you've put together is financially sound. It makes sense. And I think it's more than reasonable and gets us everything that we need. Like I said, not as fast as we all want it, but whatever comes as fast as we all want it, right? So I would commend you and your team. I mean, I think you've done a spectacular job. I think this looks tremendous. So I don't know if anybody else has anything to say.
Yeah, agreed. And I really like the analysis that you added about the impact to the individual taxpayer. I think that's incredibly persuasive and enlightening for people, because I think when we understand the impact that this has, and we can understand all the work you've done to make this as financially, fiscally possible for the town as possible. But I don't know that the average taxpayer will know that. So I think that information is just really helpful, and I hope that it gets to town meeting and people see it and pay attention to it, because it's just great.
Yeah, it puts it in an easily digestible, manner, I
Yeah,
think. I think
exactly.
folks can see how it affects them, right? Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, no other questions, so I guess we could move on to the budget.
Okay, I need Lynn, though. Lynn.
No problem.
She thought she was going to escape, and I was going to forget she wasn't sitting here with me. Nope. All right, so we have a lot of friends with us here tonight. We've got Bill Mitchell from the Assessor's Office. We have Andrew, who is here from the Community Development Department, who I don't know if you've ever met before, Andrew Shapiro. I don't know if you've ever come before Finance
I
Committee.
have, but I don't
Okay.
know that others have.
We have Chief Gray from the Police Department. Chief Ware couldn't be with us because he's at a conference, but if you have questions for him moving forward, he's happy to come back.
Okay.
Am I missing any of my? Laurie was here for Facilities Master Plan 2 and is going to be the lead on Facilities Master Plan 2. So you may all have to prop her up as the next 15 years come forward, because we're going to be locking her in that office and never letting her out. So, all right, here we go. So this is our fiscal year 23 town manager's recommended budget. Twice now I have put the fiscal year instead of the actual year on my Christmas card at home. Thank God my husband also works in municipal government and thinks it's funny, but it's embarrassing. So some of this you've seen before when we did our forecasting, but just a quick review. This is our fiscal year 23 revenue. We're presenting a balanced budget within capacity as determined by those forecasting exercises and our additional information that we've learned since then. It includes our consideration of the advice from the Revenue and Fixed Cost Committee. And this $124 million number, it's an all-in number. It includes the transfers to stabilization accounts, the funding from capital using free cash. It's very comprehensive. Some people have asked me what's included in those other tax type numbers. That's our motor vehicle, our mails tax, any penalties and interest that people pay on taxes. So if you have an overdue tax bill and you're paying interest on it, it goes in there. And then any pilots that we're getting. The charges for service, that's solid waste fees, our ambulance fees, and our other fees like building. For license and permits, it's burial, food, gas, and liquor. Our miscellaneous revenue is cell tower, fines, interest income, and any host community annual fees that we receive. And then that all other sources is any interfund, our capital transfers, and our reserve transfers. So the revenues for the fiscal year 23 budget include, not including the free cash for the reserves and the capital, because those are one-time revenues. We don't like to include them when we talk about them, but that total is $116,527,184, a 7.47% increase from last fiscal year. The property taxes are estimated to grow by 9.75%. 8.136 million of that 8.136 million total of that, and 6 million of it is new growth. And I know we talked a lot about that extraordinary new growth at our last meeting and how this was kind of a mind-boggling, crazy year for us. Think about it, our property taxes, and I'll talk about this more later, but they usually increase by 2.5% plus new growth. So this 9.75% number, especially for those of you that are new to the Finance Committee, is a very strange thing to be talking about. Lynn's still sweating, I think, next to me. But it's fine. Yeah. I mean, the 2.
Not to happen again.
Never gonna happen again. The 2.5% is only $2 million.
Okay.
So, our local receipts are decreasing by 0.6%, so they're down by $60,000. That's better than last year when we saw the $400,000 decrease. But I think what's important to think about is that, in essence, our local receipts have decreased by $460,000 from our last normal non-COVID year. So that's something to think about, and Lynn and I have talked about this. Is this just our new normal, right? Is this just the new normal after COVID, that our local receipts are less?
Yeah.
It could be that that's the case, and something we have to watch as we do our analysis over the next 5 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, we probably don't have enough time
We don't.
yet.
No,
but,
we gotta get a few more years.
Yeah.
To get the trend back again, figure out where we're going.
But have you ever seen them decrease? And as long as I've been doing this, I've never seen local
No.
receipts decrease.
Nope.
Yeah.
They've pretty much either stayed level or slight increases over
Increase,
the years, but nothing that's gone backwards and decreasing.
Right. So this is like the one place where we're really seeing kind of evidence of any recession or impacts from COVID at all, or really any revenue impacts. Obviously, our new growth number greatly offset it. You remember last year we didn't have an offset, right? So last year was really, this year we're operating in now is a tough budget. But that is, it's tough to see. Local aid per our policies and procedures is level funded. So for those of you that haven't done this before, the state's not on the same calendar as us. I don't know why they wouldn't decide that was a good idea, but they decide their budget long after we have had town meeting. So unfortunately, we kind of have to guess. So we usually level fund, and then the following year we catch up. It's always hard to tell what's going to happen. The governor's budget may not be the same. What comes out in Ways and Means, it just is a gamble. So we tend to level fund that. So again, the Proposition 2.5, that's the new growth number. It's 2.5% plus any new construction, so that's improvements or new buildings. That's what we call that new growth. We typically budget between $650,000 and $700,000 a year. This year's almost 10 times that number. That little chart that I have on the side, that's our actual new growth numbers we've had over the last 6 years. So you can see it's ranged from 570,000 to the 1.4 million. And it can really kind of be all over the place. And it's really just dependent on the year. We know that 2024 will be another good year, not good like this is. I feel like we need new adjectives. But, you know, I think that after 2024, we'll be going back to seeing more of these normal type of numbers that you're seeing.
And just for the edification, why do you think 2024 will be a bigger year?
Because we know that we have permits pending for projects that are going to be finalized during the
During that
24
time,
period.
yeah. Thank you.
And we have, in our community, we've accepted a local option that allows us to capture growth on buildings that are not at 100% completion. So we're able to capture new growth on portions of buildings
Yep.
and then capture the rest of it in the next fiscal year,
Okay.
which is to our benefit. So not every community does that. Okay. So this is just the chart that shows our revenue. As you can see, not unusual in smaller communities like us. The majority of our budget is made up by property taxes, about 73.5%. In fiscal year 22, 87% of that property tax was residential. I'll be curious to see when we actually calculate that out this year, when we do our L4, what that looks like, if that's changed at all due to some of the new growth that we have coming on. I don't think it'll be an exponential change, but a lot of our budget does fall on residents. Yeah. So this chart breaks down our fiscal year 23 expenditures. This one matches the first one you saw and is all in, so it includes any state assessments. So while we do get aid from the state, we also get bills. And so a lot of time they give us the money and we basically give it right back. It includes capital, it includes the reserve transfers, the $6.7 million that we're using in free cash to fund our capital program, as well as our transfer stabilization, and almost $3 million in large capital expenditures within the levy. So this breaks down our expenses by category as well, and I'll post this so you guys can all see it online too. You can see that education breaks up about half of our budget. It's actually more like 69% because we actually share a lot of things, which is great. We share our employee benefits, we share our unclassified share costs. There's many things that go into both buckets. So the fiscal year 23 budget includes increases of 7.47% in departmental spending from fiscal year 22, so not including those reserves. The municipal departments are increasing by 5.78%, which is a great improvement from the 0.6% of last year. The shared services are increasing by 10.85%. That division decreased by almost 4% last year, so we're able to bring that back to normal operations. And the education budget is increasing by 5.34%. I always like to put it in both percentages and the numbers because I think some people like to operate in different ways, but the municipal budget is increasing by $1.3 million, the school budget is increasing by $2.9 million, and the shared services is increasing by $201,000. So while shared services is increasing by 10%, it's a very small budget, so it sounds like a lot, but it's really not that much. For health insurance, the town joined the GIC in 2014. We're actually voting on rates tomorrow, so we'll have better information tomorrow. But at that time, the town was self-insured, and we appropriated about $11 million for health insurance. So in fiscal year 23, 9 years later, the recommended health insurance budget is about $1 million more. If we hadn't joined the GIC, this would be exponentially higher. We are always a little bit conservative in our calculation. And we put a 6% increase this year, although due to the number of claims due to COVID and now the insurance market rewriting itself and people going back to the doctors, as well as Fallon leaving the GIC, I think we could see it being close this year. So in the past, when I would have said, Lynn, 6% this year, I'm like, all right, 6% sounds right.
Yeah.
So we build that cushion in a little bit to accommodate for potential large increase.
Yep.
So for the breakdown, typically it's about half the school employees' insurance, and for the other half, about $3 million is retirees and $2 million is town employees. So for town staffing, we are seeing an increase this year, which is pretty exciting because we saw a decrease last year. So we are going from 210.77 employees to 220.77 employees, and I'm going to get into all of the changes in my next few slides. All the costs of these new employees have been accounted for. So we included the OPEB cost, we include the health insurance, workers' comp, Medicare. It's an all-in approach for all employees.
Great.
We usually have about $17,000 to $18,000 per employee when we bring somebody new on. Okay? We did the same thing for Facilities Master Plan 2. We used the same numbers. All right, these are some highlights and changes, and before we get into kind of the bigger employee changes, but if you have any questions as we go along, or if you want to talk to any of the department heads that are here about some of these changes, we're happy to do that. So some of the things were simple ones. We moved the telephones and the advertising line items from each budget for efficiency. So this is horrifying, but we got phone bills, and then we would basically hand them all out, and then we would kind of write ourselves checks, and then we would pay ourselves for the phone bills. So it was creating all this kind of crazy work. We were doing the same thing with gasoline and postage and a lot of other things. So we,
Lots of details.
yep. So for efficiency, we're going to stop doing that, and we're bringing it all into one budget. And we're doing the same thing with advertising. For the third year in a row, we are funding your reserve account at $1.5 million. We were able to keep that whole again. I think that has been very helpful, and I think that it's something that we're going to continue to do moving forward. I think it's really important that we continue to have that. We just went into the red on snow and ice while I was on vacation. So we may be coming to see you soon, but
No,
you don't think so? All right, well, that's good news. But it's an important thing that we continue to have that there, because we don't know when something's going to happen, and we may.
No, we just used it earlier.
Yeah, we
right?
used it for the senior center,
Yeah.
right? So these things happen. Again, like we've done the last 2 years, we have our salary reserves for any of our unsettled collective bargaining agreements, and we have a fiscal year 23 implementation of a new STEP program for unrepresented employees. Our COLAs are at 1.5%. For assessing, we have a new part-time data collector position. So we have a lot of requirements from the state on how we have to collect data information when doing our assessments. We want to make sure that we're meeting all of those requirements on a cyclical manner. And so Bill has asked us to put a new part-time position in, and we have done that in this budget. And Bill is here to answer any questions much more eloquently than I can about that. For community development, we are bringing back the part-time housing specialist. So this was something that we lost last year when we had to reduce services. What we actually did was we removed it from the budget. We put in a CPC application. We had a consultant who is currently on board right now doing a whole analysis of our housing, and is going to give us kind of a housing plan to help us with our affordable housing, making sure we stay at 10% once we reach the 10%, different ideas for our housing issues. And then this part-time person, will come on to implement that plan. So it's bringing that back. For the seniors.
I'm sorry, can
Yeah,
I
of
just
course.
interrupt? When do you anticipate hitting that 10% threshold?
That's a great question. So at Maytown meeting with the Royal Crest zoning, if that project passed, that would get us
Yeah.
to 10.5%.
Great. Thanks.
10.5, even with the new census numbers. With the new census numbers, we're around 7.
And Melissa,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt, we also have the inclusionary zoning being considered.
Yes, and then additionally, thank you, we have inclusionary zoning being considered at town meeting. So once we got to the 10%, this person would help us with that. So inclusionary zoning, basically what that says is that if you build a certain number of units, a percentage of those would need to be affordable in
Right.
order to keep us at that 10%.
Yep.
Or you have to pay a fee. That would go towards affordable housing.
I think it's pretty remarkable, though, because I know for a few years now, we've been talking about hitting that, and, I don't recall there being a plan, let alone a date that we thought we might hit it, so congratulations.
Exciting. Yeah, I'm hopeful.
I mean, I know things still have to happen.
Yeah.
I'm just,
It's good to be able to plan for it and have it happen in a systematic way. So fingers crossed, and this person would be a huge part of making sure that we get to the 10% and stay at it. That's the most important part, because if you
Yep.
fall below, you can be vulnerable again, so we want to stay there. For the senior center, I mentioned this earlier, we anticipate it's going to open, and guess what, we're going to have to run it. So it includes the increased electricity costs, the increased water costs, et cetera. And it also increases the hours for the van drivers. So we think that that's going to be, what we actually did was our van driver retired, and so we went to 2 part-time drivers instead.
bless you,
At slightly increased hours, so that we can have a little bit more overlap, and we can do some night hours, because they are doing some night programming now. We have a younger population who wants to come to the center, who works during the day. So we're finding that we need to adapt a little bit, which is great.
Cool.
And then we have $20,000 for the festival committee. One of the things, we just did this survey of residents related to the APA funding, and one of the things that we heard a lot about was people feeling like they're isolated or they want to have more community, and so we thought this would be a really good way to bring people together in the next year. And so we have $20,000 for the festival committee to use towards their events, so we're excited about that. And we also just put an application in for a festival committee grant, so fingers crossed, that would be exciting. Thanks to Sarah for doing that.
I'll just comment that I think that's really great because a lot of the activities are funded by donations and, our local businesses contributing a lot to a lot of our events that we have, and given all the impacts that they've had from COVID, and, it's not been easy on a lot of those businesses. So I think that's really nice for the businesses as well to have some relief from us always asking them for donations.
I agree, and it's the same people,
Yeah.
So between that and Columbia Gas, I think, it's time, so we're excited to be able to do that. Okay, so we also have some pretty major changes to public safety. And you're all going to laugh when I go through the firefighter ones without Chief Ware here, because everyone laughed at me last time, but we'll do our best. So we have 4 new firefighters, 4 new police officers, 1 911 communications dispatcher, and this is part of a long-term staffing plan for both of those departments. So I like to joke, and I joked at the last one, that the police and fire pretend they have nothing in common, but they have all these overlapping themes, and there's a lot of overlapping themes when we talk about these improvements that they need. So we all know the town population has increased by 14% from 2000 to 2020, and we've also seen a real increase in our seasonal and day populations, right? We've had Brooks, Merrimack increasing in capacity, and then increased businesses that are bringing more people to North Andover every day. And then we also know we have Amazon coming in, right? And we know this new growth is coming from Amazon. So we're starting with fire, just a little bit, and I don't, one of the things that I talked to the 2 chiefs about, and I don't know how much people know about how the departments run now, right? And so I think it's important to kind of understand the structures and how they operate. So from 1992 to 1999, we had 44 firefighter personnel. In 1999, there was an override, and that passed to allow for 8 new firefighters in the deputy chief position. That brought us to 52 firefighters and 3 administrators. We had 1 firefighter per 524 residents. In 2019, we increased by 1 administrative position, and that's our EMS coordinator, the person who's in charge of all of our ambulances. Today, because of our population increases, we have 594 residents per firefighter. It's a 13.4% increase since 1999. So we haven't seen a single firefighter increase since that 1999 period. And the call volume has also increased. So from 2009 to 2019, the total increase in calls for service was 22.4%. And from 2009 to 2019, there was a 13.3% increase in EMS calls. And EMS is ambulance, for those of you that don't know. We run BLS here, Basic Life Service. For our fire department structure, we have 4 units, and they each work a 24-hour shift. There's 40 firefighters and 12 lieutenants for suppression. Each shift has 3 lieutenants and 10 firefighters. We run 2 stations. We have fire apparatus, 2 engine companies. They have 1 lieutenant and 2 firefighters on them. 1 ladder truck that has 1 lieutenant and 1 firefighter assigned to it. And then 2 ambulances that each have 2 firefighters assigned to them. Our ultimate goal here is to add 4 new firefighters. We would add an additional firefighter on the ladder truck for staffing. The result would be 1 lieutenant and 2 firefighters. This would enhance safety both for the members and the public. Many of the duties on the ladder truck require 3 members to be safely executed. So things like a 35-foot ladder raise, the roof ventilation at fire scenes, natural gas and propane gas emergencies, and EMS calls. So if both ambulances are out on calls, or the ladder just happens to be the first one to get there, the ladder is a Class 5 ambulance. Due to the increase of all of our apparatus being on simultaneous calls, the ladder truck currently responds to more incidents than ever. They had 76 calls in January 2022 alone. It's also the primary piece of apparatus in many incidents. Again, with the development of the Amazon building, the redevelopment of Aussie generally, and other new developments coming to town, fully staffing the ladder will be essential to providing the services we need. So this was 3 firefighters. This is when they all thought I was funny. This was 3 firefighters doing the flat shoulder carry. So it's a 35-foot ladder, and it weighs over 140 pounds, so 3 of them are supposed to carry it together. This is them extending the fly by 35-foot ladder. You're supposed to have 1 in the back and 2 in the front in order to essentially have the weight be evenly distributed. And then this was on January 31st, 2022. So we had a fire, and unfortunately we only had 1 firefighter on the truck. So this firefighter was alone out on the ladder. The second member, the lieutenant, was on the ground operating the ladder controls. Okay, so now the police. So prior to 2021, we had 36 police officers and 1 administrator. In 2021, using a federal COPS grant, and I should mention, we apply for the COPS grant and the SAFER grant every year. Regina, I could tell you, unfortunately, we haven't received them, but it is something that we do apply for. The town hired 3 police officers, bringing the number of police officers to 39. One thing I will tell you is that the last time we hired a new police officer or new firefighter, or we put a new police officer, new firefighter position on, was when the 2 chiefs were hired. Which to me, I was like, oh my God, that's crazy, but it's true. We had 1 police officer for every 697 residents in 2001. The number of staff has seen no changes since then, other than the addition of 1 civilian employee and some changes to rank. We currently have 1 police officer for every 792 residents, a 13.6% increase in the last 19 years. In 2021, the police responded to 17,451 calls. We have 1 chief, 2 lieutenants, 9 sergeants, 3 on mids, days, and evenings, 29 patrol officers, 1 to 12 reserve officers, and 40 full-time sworn officers. One of the things we talked about a lot when we were looking at this was how we compare to other communities. So the size is square miles, and when I was looking at the analysis, and Stan knows I love data, so I was kind of shocked by this, because North Andover, we have 39 sworn police officers. In other communities that are much smaller than us, Wilmington, 17 square miles, 46 officers. Wakefield, 7 square miles, 42 officers. Tewksbury, 20 square miles, 62 officers, right? And this was surprising to me, and I thought it was something that we really needed to look at, because I think it says a lot about our department and what they get done, considering how few people they have. Yeah.
Is there any kind of formula that, like maybe at the state level or something like that, that they offer? This is based on your square miles and your number, any kind of metric we're trying to meet. Comparing to the other towns is great. I think it is very eye-opening. But I'm just wondering if there's any kind of state metric that, and where do we stand on that, or maybe it doesn't exist?
We talked about that a little bit, and we talked about, if the FBI Academy has a metric. I looked at a few of the police magazines, and they have some suggestions. But I haven't seen anything right from the state that makes any recommendations. I wouldn't be surprised with post standards if they might eventually come out with something. But those regulations are all still being drafted. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because I realized with the ranks, I just noticed there isn't any captains.
We do not have captains.
Is there a reason for that?
We would like to have captains. It's something that we're looking at moving forward. Like when we talk about that 5-year, we have a 5-year staffing plan for both police and fire. We would like to see some changes in the rank to increase some of our abilities in the higher levels. It's something that we're looking at moving forward.
Okay.
How many police officers was it that, I just remember
39.
the number, that we would hire?
We're at hire 4.
4.
We hire, is that up to us to decide how many?
Does that mean it's what we could afford?
It's what's in the budget.
It's what we could afford this year. We'll continue to look at it. I think we're excited to be able to look at the 4. I think I don't know. It was probably one of the first times I've ever seen Chief Gray smile when I said put 4 officers in the budget this year. But I think it's something that we need to continue to look at.
Because you'll have to include the total. You'll have to include their insurance and everything that comes with it.
Right.
That's why.
Yeah. Plus, we have, the academy, outfitting them, the overtime, the cruisers. So there's a lot of expenses that go into bringing on a new police officer that we have to account for, and that he's done a great job accounting for. But it's something that we have to continue to look at. So the other thing we want to talk about is 911. And if you were impressed with the police numbers, I was like blown away by 911. So we've had 9 911 communications dispatchers since 1997. 911 falls under Chief Gray. That's one for every 3,435 residents. In 2021, the communications dispatchers fielded 14,194 calls. They logged 22,000 calls into their system. They have a computer-aided dispatch. It's where all their calls start. So even if someone doesn't call 911, say they call the business line, say they come in, any other way a call could come in, it all gets logged into the system. They answered 33,715 calls on the business line. So that might just be somebody saying, my dog is lost, or I don't know what to do about this, or who do I call about this? Complaining about a pothole, can be anything. They transmitted or received 101,614 radio transmissions. The average 911 call is 1 minute and 38 seconds. Interestingly, the calls are really evenly distributed by the day of the week, but heaviest between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. In the past 2 years, we've begun to receive cellular calls. So in the past, if you called 911 from your cell phone, it was picked up by Essex County. Now, if you call 911 by your cell phone, there is a 95% chance, I would say, it's being picked up by one of our dispatches. And the reason that we made the decision to do that is because if you call 911 and Essex County picks up the phone and you say, I have an emergency, I'm in front of North Andover House of Pizza, they don't know what that is. And so it's really important to have a dispatcher who knows the community. And so that's really improved how we've done that. We run 2 dispatchers at a time, although you will see that because of how lean we operate, we recognized a dispatcher on Monday who was working a fire alone recently. So there is time. This would allow us to go to a lead dispatcher who would be focusing on a lot of admin, training, but would also be able to jump on and be the third when we have multiple serious calls occurring, which would be a huge benefit to us. So the ultimate goal would be to increase, oh, I went the wrong direction. I got lost. Oh, all right, so back to police again. So my slides are kind of backwards here, I apologize. So our ultimate goal would be to increase the police officer staffing by 4 patrol officers and the 911 dispatch staff by 1 communication officer in order to better serve North Andover. And the why is that our changes to population and changes to type of calls are requiring more and different types of attention. You know, some of the calls we get are almost city-like. And so we have to be able to have the metrics to respond to that. We also have a really renewed emphasis on community policing. It's a real goal of both the chief and I to continue to focus on that. And that means that officers are spending more time at calls with multiple officers responding to back each other up. And that's important. We have really focused on mental health now at the police department. We've got the community support coordinators out of there. And we've just really tried to kind of turn policing more into like an educational type of environment. And so it's been good.
Last year, you put the community support, and that's worked out well?
Worked out great.
Good.
And we used grant funding to bring a second one on using APA funds, so she's there right now too. And then the state gave us an earmark for $100,000 to supplement that as well, just because due to COVID we've seen so many mental health issues. So, you know, Chief Gray's done a great job of building out that program, and it's really been very successful. And he can tell you that we've seen things that maybe before would have gone through the justice system that now have been able to go through Deanna instead, and it's really been great. So
That's great.
She's fabulous. Do we have any questions for Chief Gray or Andrew or Bill before I get into the enterprise fund budgets?
I don't. Anybody? No, that all was pretty straightforward. Looked good.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
All right, so for the sewer enterprise fund budget, not often I get to talk about budgets that are decreasing. The operating budget is decreasing by 2.3% from fiscal year '22. It's because our debt is falling off and we don't have any big projects currently coming on. The sewer rates are forecasted to remain the same this year for the 11th consecutive year. He's got a long ride, so we'll let him go. But a rate increase may be necessary in future years if the assessment continues to increase in that manner. So we do recognize that, you know, we have managed to keep things relatively steady. We do have a really healthy retained earning. It's currently at $5.9 million. But in the future, if the GLSD does decide they need to do some large projects, we may have to look at it. The assessment from the Greater Lawrence Sanitary District is forecasted to increase by 5%. The only increases we're seeing in the budget, even with that decrease, are really supply and demand issues for materials,
Okay.
which isn't shocking. The water enterprise fund budget, again, because the debt was pretty much taken together, that's opted to decrease by 3.7%. Those rates will stay the same again for the 11th consecutive year. We are introducing a business manager. They'll be responsible for the water and sewer billing. We think that it's going to be a huge benefit to have somebody there who's responsible for the billing, who can even keep an eye on when people may be having a leak or may have a running toilet and can let them know in advance. A lot of the time that's a terrible surprise when you get your quarterly water bill. And so having someone there to be on top of that is going to be really beneficial to the community. And the retained earnings for that one is at $5.4 million. This is our chart of our enterprise fund expenditures. So you'll all notice that something's missing, and it's the Stevens estate. So we will not have it this year because we don't have a budget for it. So Lynn's like, what do we do? I'm like, we don't put it in. It will be a revolving account, so you'll all get to vote on that. But so you'll see we have salaries make up about 14% of all of our enterprise fund expenditures. Transfer to capital projects about 13.7%, and the indirect costs actually get taken over to the general fund budget to pay for their benefits, et cetera. All right, so then the reserves, just to give you an idea of where we are. Our stabilization account balance was $5.3 million. We are recommending an appropriation of $221,000. Our capital stabilization account balance is $1.3 million. We are recommending an appropriation of $500,000, but there will also be an additional appropriation where we will be taking money from new growth and saving it for Kittredge to do the design later. So there will be an additional appropriation you'll see outside of our regular transfer, with like a whole lot of me disclaiming, this is to save for Kittredge. Remember, we're using it for Kittredge, just so nobody tries to use it for anything else. We have the OPEB trust fund balance that has $6 million. A little bit more than we typically transfer. You know, we typically transfer the $75,000. It's more in there this year because we have new positions. And so we want to make sure we're saving for those. And then our specialized stabilization balance stays the same at $764,000. As you know, we're trying not to use that. We want to use your reserve account instead if we have any issues within the operating budget. And our free cash was certified this year at $12,861,921. Just wanted to remind you about the capital because it's been a while. For funding of capital in fiscal year 23, we're using $6.7 million in free cash. Again, we don't want to use debt because we're saving it for all these huge projects we're doing. We're going to borrow, though, from our debt, that $1 million. We're going to appropriate from the tax levy, very unusual. Typically, we only do $50,000 projects or less using the tax levy. We're going to be using $1.8 million for a total of $9.6 million in capital this year. We'll still have $5.2 million in free cash available after appropriation, which is a very healthy amount of free cash to end our fiscal year with. Those of you that have not ever used free cash, what happens is on June 30th, free cash goes away, and then it gets recertified, and you get that number back, plus anything else that you carried over from this year. So anything we haven't spent in our budget, anything that was underestimated for receipts, all goes into a new number that can be used after it gets certified, which is usually around September-ish. And I think that's it. That's it.
Okay. Anybody have questions? No? Okay. Okay, thank you
All right,
very,
thank
very
you.
much.
And
Appreciate it.
I'm always happy to come back, so
Okay.
don't hesitate. I know Jim Mealy and Superintendent Gilligan have a great presentation.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Lori. So that would lead me to ask Superintendent, Assistant Superintendent to come up, please. And let me just officially say congratulations again. You guys must be pretty excited.
Beyond thrilled, so thank you, Greg Gilligan, the superintendent. I'm excited to be here tonight, and Dr. Jim Mealy, the assistant superintendent's with us. We're going to walk you through the operating budget tonight. I know that you've seen it, but at the same time, we're thrilled about the MSBA inviting us into the eligibility period for the Kittredge School. It typically takes communities 5, 6, 7 tries even to get into the eligibility period. So working together in the partnership with the town, this is just remarkable. And to be able to in the next few years, be able to take that money and take the burden off the taxpayer to do these things, as Melissa laid out, is terrific for the town and terrific for our kids. So really thrilled about it. So we're going to walk you through the budget. This is a pretty remarkable budget at a 5.34% increase, and it really tackles our current needs, particularly with COVID and interrupted learning. But it really goes hand in hand, not only with our long-term operational plan and our operational needs, but also with our space needs as we move forward with Facilities Master Plan 2. So we're pretty excited. Dr. Mealy?
Is there something I did to make that? Does it look like that for you guys?
I don't
Well,
know.
I'm looking at the TV.
Yeah.
It's up a little bit too, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it is. You're right. Yeah, I don't know.
But we can read it more here. Oh, yeah. I guess the top is gone.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's readable for us.
Okay. All right. Before we start, I just want to echo what the Finance Committee was saying earlier. I know when we were doing our 8 public forums during the year, I said this a few times. I was really concerned that all the work that everyone was doing was going to be for naught because, we were talking about the need for an override and maybe debt exclusion and all that. But once Melissa and Lynn started doing the schedules that she put together and that they put together and showing the timeline and that this could really work, and especially the first 4 projects would have no impact, I said to Dr. Gilligan, I said, this is going to happen. So it was very exciting at that point to know that we were not working in vain. So I just wanted to echo what you guys had said. What we're going to do tonight, because there are some new members to the Finance Committee, I've done this a few times over the years, and it's just kind of a School Budget 101. So I'm going to run through all the different funding sources for the school budget, and then we'll talk about FY23. So we'll talk about the funding sources, we'll talk about the total annual, what that all looks like when you bring it all together for total expenditures, and then the FY23 budget overview. So what bills the school funding? There are different sources: the general fund, revolving accounts, circuit breaker, capital projects, grants, and indirect costs. So the general fund is the annual operating expenses. Not surprisingly, the big parts of that are salaries, contracted services, and supplies. It's funded through the local taxes. It's governed by federal and state regulations. The big thing with the school department is that we can transfer between lines during the year. So the appropriation is a whole amount, $52 million. And then because a lot of things change during the year, we have the ability to transfer from one line to the other. And it does include shared expenses. When Melissa talked about some of the shared expenses, there's 2 different types. There's indirect costs, which we'll talk about, and there's also a couple of departments that we share some resources, facilities and IT. Our revolving accounts, you're probably familiar with some of them: food services, community programs, athletics. Those are individual accounts set up for specific programs. The money can only be used for those programs. Money comes in the way of fees and can be spent out of those. There's a couple of different types. Food services and community programs are what you might know as enterprise funds. They are self-sufficient. So they collect the money, all the money, and they cover all of their expenses. And then there are others that do not collect enough to cover all the expenses. Athletics is a good example. We do collect athletic fees, but that pays for transportation and officials and things like that, but the coaches are paid out of the operating budget. So it's kind of a mix when you're talking about covering the expenses. Grants, they supplement the general fund. They are funded by federal and state funds, governed by very strict rules, much more restrictive in making changes. So with the grant, once we create a budget, if we need to make a change, we have to do an amendment and get it approved in order for that to happen. Grants and the amounts of these grants approved annually by the awarding entity. And they include special education grants, title grants for disadvantaged students, professional development grants, and the last couple of years, quite a bit of COVID relief funding. Circuit breaker, if you've heard that term, That is something that is paid to communities as a reimbursement for spending over a certain amount per student. And so the formula is you take the state average for that year, you multiply it by 4, and if a student costs you more than that amount, in this example, the per pupil amount was $11,676 for FY21, you multiply that by 4, you get $46,704. If a student is an out-of-district placement, they could easily cost us $146,704. So that means we could claim $100,000, and they try to reimburse each year at 75%, but sometimes there's not enough money, it will be lower than that. But if they're reimbursing at 75%, that means the following year, of that extra $100,000, we would get $75,000 back to us. And it used to not include transportation costs, but it does now, which is great.
Which can be a big cost,
Yeah.
particularly without
Right.
district placements.
I remember
Yeah.
that.
Yep, it's about another additional $150,000 a year for us. And that amount is determined annually depending on how much is available. Capital projects, you're obviously familiar with those. We've been talking about those a lot. Used to build, replace, or improve the facilities, grounds, and mechanical and technological infrastructure. Primary sources through taxes. They're part of the overall capital improvement plan. And when you see those expenses, those show up in our indirect costs. Speaking of which, those are not included in the operating budget. They come from the local taxes, and they include employee benefits, borrowing costs for capital projects, insurances, and functions performed by other departments, such as snow removal. I have to do an end-of-year report, every school district does. And in that end-of-year report, you have to report the total cost of education in the district. So we take a percentage. Lynn is still there? Yeah. Yeah. So Lynn does things that are for our benefit, and so we assign a percentage of her salary. Obviously, the snow and removal is done, and so all of those have to be added up and reported, and those are reported as indirect costs. And as I said, the shared expenses, those are the technology and facilities, and they're kind of a mix. We have custodians and some maintenance guys that are in our budget, but Steve Foster is shared, the IT director, things like that. So the numbers for those, and I'm using FY21 because that's the last year that we have all the actuals for.
Yeah.
We're in FY22, so we don't know what the total end-of-year cost will be. But it gives you a good idea. $52.9 million for the general fund. We got $1,459,000 back in circuit breaker because of what we had reported the previous year. In grants, there's a different story in revolving in grants this year than what you normally see. They're kind of flipped. Revolving is down, not surprisingly, because we didn't have a lot of community programs last year, and we didn't have busing, paid busing, although food services was up because they were delivering all those meals to the community and getting reimbursed for those. But we also have a lot more in grants than we normally would because of the COVID funding. So you can see the grants total $3.166 million for FY21, while the revolving accounts total $2.6 million. And that school lunch program is up about $600,000. It's interesting. For the longest time, community programs was running and building up a surplus each year, and they've kind of drawn that down because they're not generating what they used to. While food services was, for the longest time, running pretty much level. And they've been able to now build up, and now she can make some investment in her equipment and in the program itself. And then the indirect costs. So these are all the things we've talked about, whether it's debt, school choice tuition, employee insurance. Obviously, that's the biggest one. The one for active employees is almost $6.3 million. But just under $14.6 million is our total for indirect costs. And when you add them all up, you get $74,829,835 for total expenditures. Just about $60 million for all the others besides indirect, and then the indirect gets added in to bring it up to that amount. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
A little bit of rabbit holes. We won't have to go down it too much. But what is the rate of our student populace that is out of district, and has that changed at all since COVID?
Well, I thought you were going to stop it before you said since.
Sorry. we can table it if it.
No, it's okay. I haven't really seen much of an impact in our out of district from COVID.
Okay.
When you're talking special education out of district?
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, over the last, I'd say 5 years, seen an impact of adding programs in district and being able to keep students in district. And we've gone from probably about 65 to 67 on average to about 50 students. So it's had an impact.
Yeah. Thank
Yep.
you.
Sure. So you can see, except for the top part, although everything's here, not surprisingly, the general fund takes up most of the expenses and indirect costs a large chunk. And that's what Melissa was referring to when she said, well, it looks like the school budget is about 50% of the budget. When you factor in the indirect costs as well, it puts us over 50%. So the FY23 budget, we're going to talk about the strategic plan and the school committee budget directives, which inform our long-term plan. We'll show the impact to that timeline of the long-term plan. And then the focus really this year has been on recovery services. But a lot of those recovery services, as you'll see, the positions are also our long-term plan positions. So we're getting them kind of earlier than we thought, but they're focused on recovery services right now. But then we'll transition into our long-term plan pretty seamlessly. And then the FY23 recommended budget. I'm going to have Dr. Gilligan just talk us through the next couple of slides.
Yeah, so our budget has really been based on our strategic plan, which includes 3 main objectives: equity for all students, consistent and rigorous curriculum, and targeted professional practice. And under those 3 main objectives, we have 11 specific initiatives as part of our strategic plan. It's also based on the school committee budget directives, and the school committee approves budget directives every year prior to budget season. I think one of the main changes this year in the budget directives was really aligning it not only just with our traditional strategic plan, but looking at the needs as a result of COVID, and also continuing to work on class size. All right. Additionally, in the budget directives, continue to provide our faculty with up-to-date instructional materials and professional development, and recommend, again, budget programming and initiatives for our highest need learners, as well as continuing to engage and build capacity in special education and our summer programming we've done this past summer specifically to COVID, and that we've continued to do throughout the year, just more as recently as February break, April break coming up as well too.
So I just want to go back a slide and draw your attention to that third bullet, where it's aligning the budget with the strategic objectives and the initiatives, but also with the long-term plan and the facilities master plan. That's what becomes clear when we talk about the recovery services and the long-term positions. So I was looking for a visual of how to explain the timeline and the impact that the COVID has had on that timeline and on the now presented facilities master plan. And it's interesting because after I had presented this for the public hearing, I got a lot of comments. Oh, that makes sense the way you did that. And then I had somebody say, well, why didn't you explain changing the timeline? And I was like, well, it wasn't for lack of trying.
It's colorful. You can add that to your book, too.
So we're in FY22, and as you all know, we were 1 year into the long-term plan, and then COVID hits, and it's like, okay, we need to pump the brakes, and we need to be responsible. We need to see what impact is going to come as a result of this pandemic. And so the budget was a smaller increase than anticipated. We held off on adding positions, and we were assessing the impact of the pandemic. For this coming year, FY23, we're in recovery mode. So this year we've had recovery services funded through the funding that the town manager was able to provide for recovery services. And now we're adding positions into the operating budget, and the ESSER funding that we get will help us with the other recovery service positions. And then FY24, we're going to transition from those recovery service positions into the long-term plan, which will become clearer in a second. And then after that, you've got FY25. You saw the timeline the town manager presented, where the first project is hopeful to come online, and we would have to add the positions to go along with the additional space at the middle school. And so that's what you would expect to see in the operating budget that year, level services and then new positions. And then in a year where there's not an expectation of a project coming online, we would expect just level services, and I have as an example FY26, and then FY27 and out, any new projects coming on, you would expect to see the additional positions added to the operating budget. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for FY22, the way it looks has been this. I mentioned the town manager provided $2 million for recovery services, added to the operating budget, and added to $1.4 million in ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funding, gave us a total of $57.7 million to provide an education this year from the operating budget. The remainder of $2.38 million is what will be left, what's anticipated to be left in ESSER 3 funding that we will use towards recovery positions for next year.
I'm sorry, what is that, sir?
Yeah, so you have ESSER 1, 2, and 3. Those are federal grants provided to help deal with the pandemic.
Oh, like COVID relief grants?
So, right, and I think a lot of districts are like us in that ESSER 1 funding was used mostly for masks, mitigation factors.
PPE.
Okay.
Right, we got the tents, masks and soap and all those things. Now, most districts are using the last of their ESSER 2 money and ESSER 3 funding for recovery positions.
Okay.
So most are in the same boat.
So with the 3/8 that's left over, is that just, has it been, like, does the grant come in next year, or how does that, was it money we have but we can't spend this year, or how does that
No,
work?
it's money that we don't anticipate having to spend. So we know we know what we have for recovery positions and all of our other positions, so we anticipate $0.98 million we have in ESSER 3, which has been approved, and we can access the funds. Mm-hmm. We anticipate needing $600,000 of that for this year, and then the remaining.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
And you're going to talk about what we're going to use that for?
Absolutely.
Yep. And so we've been talking about, Dr. Gilligan's going to talk about what those are.
Yeah, I mean, it's been remarkable. I think that with the budget increase of the 5.34%, combined with the ESSER funds, putting those two things together have allowed us to hire positions that we just have not been able to have in years. And they've been critical result of the interrupted learning. But frankly, there are positions that we've needed for a long time, and they're really what our kids need. So you can't see it at the top, but it talks about reading teachers and reading interventionists at the elementary, and we have 4.5 that we've added to the budget, along with 2 additional math interventionists. That's just 6.5 interventionists at elementary.
Sorry.
All right. As well as coaches at the elementary and the middle school to provide support for our teachers in professional development. And I think probably one of the biggest additions this year is we've been able to hire 2 parent liaisons that are bilingual, and the ability for us to connect with the community. We are a community with just about 30 different languages spoken within our district, very diverse community, and they've been an amazing addition to our office.
Keep going.
Yep. We were able to add positions for classroom teachers. And one of the things you'll see as we continue to impact students, we've run out of space, and that's why we have a facilities master plan too. there's just nowhere to put more teachers in terms of classroom teachers at the middle school. And we've added them one there last year at the middle school, and we added them in this budget and going forward at the high school and the elementary as well. I think one of the keys as part of this budget is really taking care of the mental health and well-being of students. So in this budget, we added 3 social workers, counselors across the district, as well as a school psychologist. ETL stands for Evaluation Team Leader, and those are special education positions. Again, one of the things that we saw with the pandemic was we had meetings that took place, and I think that Zoom's been terrific. We've gotten more participation from parents, but at the same time, the paperwork and the running of those meetings, there was a backlog, and there was a need for these positions to begin with, and they've certainly come in handy now. EL stands for English Learners, and those are for students who qualify and need additional time and support, where English is not their first language and they have a demonstrated need. Dr. Mealy. So we have an operating FY23. So to go from FY23 next year, 22-23 school year, we have an operating budget increase in recovery services of $1,190,000. Long-term positions included in those recovery services are just shy of $800,000. Additionally, we have ESSER 3 funding for additional recovery services position at just slightly over $1 million.
I'm sorry, is that $1 million approximately from the the leftover that Jen just asked about, or is that new?
So you'll see for ESSER 3, so the 1.19 is, you'll see when we show the FY23 budget request, we have level services, and then we have the additional positions moving from recovery services to the operating budget. That's the 1.19.
Okay, gotcha.
The
Okay.
1 million, just over 1 million, the ESSER 3 funding is covering those positions and then additional extra hours and things
Gotcha.
that allow us to keep the schools running.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
It'll be a lot easier to read in a chart.
Just to repeat, that's grant funding?
The ESSER 3,
That's
yes.
the
ESSER 3 is
Yep.
grant funding, yes.
So you can see how this is going to happen over the next couple of years. For FY22, $54.3 million is the operating budget. $2 million was the recovery service funding, and then $1.4 million came from ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 and 3. For FY23, the recovery services funding goes away, but the ESSER 3 money is the 2.28 you see in the gray, and the operating budget is increased by 5.34% to become $57.2 million. And then in FY24, the operating budget, there's $100,000 you saw that was going to be left from ESSER 3, and then we would need $61.182 million, assuming a 3% increase in expenses,
Yep.
in order to have the operating budget cover all of our expenses.
So can I ask you, does
Yep.
that assume that all of these recovery positions that we were just talking about stay on in fiscal year '24?
Kind of. You'll see where we transition from, so some of the recovery services positions, like we have more reading teachers in recovery services than we had in the long-term plan. So instead of having 4 reading or 4.5 reading teachers, it might be 2 or 3. So not all of them will continue, but we just transition from that 5-year plan that you saw before into that plan.
I see.
So what it will look like is the operating budget will be $57.2 million, ESSER 3 will be $2.28, and the total will be $59 million, about $59.5 million. That's a 5.34% increase. And just trying to, this addresses your question now, is if you look at the recovery services positions in that first column, and this is 2 slides, you'll see 4.5 reading interventionists, 2 math interventionists, 2 math coaches, 3 literacy coaches, and so on. And you can see how they're going to be funded for next year. Not all recovery services, some moving to the operating. You can see the blue column are the positions that'll be funded out of the operating. In the green column are those that'll be funded from ESSER. But the total FY23 is pretty similar. We've added, you can see, we've added a
Oh, yeah. Literary coach.
where is it? We a literacy coach. We've added I went ahead one. A library media specialist,
Yep.
and then one other position in there, so that the total goes from $2,030,000 to $2,230,000.
Yep.
But you can see, again, in the blue, those are the positions coming from the operating, and then in the green, those are
is
positions
ESSER.
paid out of the ESSER funding.
And the last column was fiscal year.
23 total, so that's
Right.
the two of
Yep.
them added together.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
And Dr. Gilligan loves a Venn diagram.
I do love a good Venn diagram. Look, at the end of the day, level services for us is always around 3%. And so a lot of the years when we looked at increases of 3.25%, 3.5%, it left very little money for new initiatives. The ability to have a 5.34% budget, also using ESSER money, allows us to hire positions that are needed. ESSER allows us to, so the increase is getting us a lot further along than we've gotten in the past. Then ESSER allows us to kind of bridge that gap as continue to move towards a long-term plan and bring and keep positions on that are sustainable. So in the recovery services, we added psychologists, we added the evaluation team leader, some of the interventionists, and the coaches, and what you'll see going forward, that was also part of the long-term plan are those reading teachers and those social workers and the parent liaisons and the special educators, the custodians, the classroom teachers, specialists in library and media, as well as English learner teachers as well. And then long-term, one of the things we've looked at is administrative support. We're pretty lean as administratively as a district, so we have recovery services plan. In the middle is really where they kind of all meet, and for us to keep that sustainable is incredibly important. And then long-term, as we move forward, looking at the future and some of the administrative positions that we look to support our schools with.
Yeah, so you can see many of the positions that our recovery services are also part of the long-term plan. And then just one other thing, Dr. Gilligan was talking about the increase, 5.34%, and inevitably somebody will ask, is that enough? And this year I have to say I wouldn't ask for more because we have no more space. If we were going to hire any more, there's no place we could put them. And that really highlights the need for these projects.
Yeah, make no mistake about it. I mean, we have teachers in this plan, but when you go back to that position, these are positions that we've needed and we've been advocating for a long time, and a lot of it's about appropriate support of all students.
So overall, what it looks like, you have the FY22 budget of 54.3. We're adding 1.7 in level services. Traditionally, and it's very consistent, we average about 3% for level services. Last year was a little bit lower. This year is a little bit higher, 3.15, but it's always very close. And then we add the 1.19 million to get to 2.9 million total increase in operating budget, or 5.34%. And we always show this picture of the different categories within our budget. You can see pretty consistently the increases.
You guys see the top column?
No.
Oh, so it is cut off.
We see elementary.
Yeah, just the.
It's just the title. So this is the FY22 budget in column 1 and the FY23 for the categories.
Look at you.
It's in our packet,
Yeah, I think that that might be zoomed in a little on the screen. It cuts off the top.
Yeah, I don't know.
So they're pretty consistent in the increases, with the largest one being transportation, and that's we're in the last year of the contract. That's a percentage increase from the contract. That's why that's higher. And then just going forward, the transition, we would anticipate we lose the ESSER funds, or we'll have used them up all but the 100,000. So the operating budget increase would have to take place in FY24 to complete that transition from recovery services to the long-term plan positions, which, as Dr. Gilligan was just saying, the focus of them are the support service positions. And then in conjunction with the projects coming online, those will be classroom and specialist teaching positions. And that's what happens FY '25 and beyond. The operating budget increases are tied to the school building projects. That's it.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry, I feel like I've asked this and I'm still not quite getting it, so I apologize if you've already explained this. But of the recovery positions that are anticipated to being added already or in the next fiscal year, like the additional classroom teachers, do you anticipate that all of them, except for the ones that were in the recoveries part of the Venn diagram, will be in the budget and sustainable positions going forward?
Right, that's the transition we're referring to, that what will happen will be the coaches and the psychologist and the extra ETL and the interventionists will be here next year.
Okay.
But the year after that, depending on how things go, we could extend that transition another year if we need to, based on the assessments that are done. But those positions go away and they're replaced by the long-term plan positions, which are additional reading teachers, social workers, library media specialists, and some teachers.
Okay, so for right now, the ones that are in the middle there, you're anticipating we're going to be able to keep and build into the budget long term.
Exactly.
So that, great.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
And COVID
Thank you
allowed
for
us to.
clarifying
yeah.
that with the question.
I have a question. I remember last year for FY '22, we did level services pretty much because, as you said, we were being responsible. But you guys were saying that you could still fund new positions
High
for
school
the high
teaching.
school,
Yep.
given the change of schedule, based on the fact that we had planned for some increase, which
We had
were not
added some teaching positions, but we hadn't yet filled them. So instead of filling
Right.
them at the elementary,
Right, you held off.
we held off
and
and used them at the high
So
school.
that was my question, because I noticed somewhere in your slides, you had 2 high school teachers, maybe in the recovery services. So is that in addition to the people that you hired for the new schedule, or?
Absolutely. So when we hired the new schedule, the operating budget at level services, we increased it by 5 teachers.
Okay,
And adding the new schedule, the 2 additional you see in there
yeah,
are the folks that we did add in order to run that new schedule,
additional to the 5.
in additional to the 5.
Right,
as
okay.
part of that plan.
Great, that's great.
I have a question. So if you go to slide, I think it's 32. I'm still trying to understand this table. So is this saying that, 1.2 million is required to basically keep all those recovery services net of the amount that's being contributed by the ESSER?
Combined with, yes. Yep.
Can you say that again?
So the recovery services are there in '22, right? And to keep those same services in '23, it's 1.2 million plus the ESSER funding.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So the ESSER funding is not really shown because it's a.
Okay.
Right, I think the clearest one I have is this one here, which is this year with recovery positions, we're using recovery services money and ESSER money. Next year, it'll be the operating budget increase and the ESSER money. And then the year after that, it's all operating.
Wait, sorry, what is recovery services money? If not, I thought ESSER money was recovery services money. This ESSER
Well,
language is
it's
new.
paying for recovery services positions. The title.
source is different.
Because the funding source that we used this year, FY '22, coming from the town, was called recovery services.
It's the free cash money that
Right.
we.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Okay. Oh, I thought we were getting CARES grant funding, and we were not necessarily going to have to use that money that we allocated in town meeting. We used it all. We used the free cash and. Wait, say it again.
In the school side,
Sorry.
It's better if I come to a microphone. I believe on the town side, the Board of Health did not end up using any of their $111,000 that we appropriated, but the school side did need all of their funding for their services, so they have used theirs in this plan.
So that 2.03 recovery, orange block, is the money that we allocated in last town meeting
That's
from
the
free
free cash.
cash to deal with COVID.
Correct.
Okay. And the 1.4 is the ESSER money?
Correct.
Which is an additional grant over and above whatever. the
Correct.
CARES Act.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yes, thank you for that.
Anybody else? No? Okay. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
And we're always more than happy to come back as well.
We appreciate that as well. Okay, well, that does it for our presentations tonight. So the few things left we have on our agenda, I would like to take I'd like to go a little bit out of order here and take the discussion on the Finance Committee policies and rules of procedures next. So this is, if you recall, this is something we've put off for quite a few meetings now. Yeah, I think that, it's unfortunate that Chris isn't here, but I'm pretty sure that she would agree that we're in a good spot now. I think we've included everything that we wanted to include. I think we've fixed all of the typographical and grammatical errors, and I think that we should be in a position to approve this now. But if anybody has any concerns, we can put it off again. But I'm not sensing or seeing anybody indicating that. So perhaps if we could have a motion.
I will motion to approve the policies and procedures.
Thank you. And do we have a second? Second by, so Dustin had the motion to approve and Eva had the second. So all those in favor of approving our Finance Committee policies and rules of procedure, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. And there are none. We can finally cross that one off the list. I thank you all very, very much. Right, yes, exactly right. But at least we'll be in a better position. We could do it on day one next year. I don't even remember doing that the prior year, so it doesn't, whatever. Anyways, okay, so now a discussion of the warrant letter draft. So, and I think I touched upon this in my email, so we don't have to determine tonight what sections we all want to take, but I wanted to put it on the agenda to make sure that we all do understand that we will have to draft some portions of this. So please take a look, if you haven't already, at what it looked like last year. I don't, aside from probably the Stevens Estate, Jen, I don't think we wouldn't need that again this year. Yeah. Done. Yours. You've earned that. You've earned that right, I think.
I think so.
So aside from that, I think that all of the remaining topics or sections would be the same. So if everyone could just please sort of take a look, and the next time I would like to, have volunteers or if need be, assign sections to that. I think, the biggest lifts would probably be the school section. Regina, I think you did that last year. And maybe the introduction or the first part, which I'll do. So, the rest of it it's not, I hope it's not terribly time-consuming. But, obviously, if anybody has questions, concerns, comments, we can discuss it. We could talk about it. I'm here to help. Other folks who have been around can certainly help. So that's where we are with that, okay? And then what do we have? Oh, you can ask as many questions as you want. Please don't limit yourself to one.
So I assume like we go to write these sections and we're looking at this big document.
You got
We're trying
it.
to distill the big document down into a smaller.
That's right.
Manageable chunk. And if we have questions about what's in the big document, the recommendation would be to meet with, is it Lori? No, the assistant, the finance director?
Yeah.
Lynn,
Yeah,
Lynn,
Lynn.
right? That
Yeah.
would be, and I don't know if people
I
have
would
done that
start
in the
there.
past, but
Yeah,
I imagine
absolutely.
that's the right approach, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
last year I called Lynn or emailed Lynn all the time
Okay.
for my section. And she was extraordinarily helpful. She's extraordinarily responsive, very smart on top of it all. So you will find her quite helpful.
Okay.
And I am so confident in that I have no problem recommending her, and she's not even in the room. You know, she's terrific, and she's always at our disposal to help with. And I think everyone would, yeah, so. So, yeah, that's where you want to start, and she'll help. And if more discussion is needed, she'll point you in the right direction, for sure. All right? Okay. So then we have an approval of our last meeting's minutes, and I actually don't know the date of that. I don't know if anybody else does. Thank you, January 25th. Thank you both. So if we could have a motion to, on that.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Dustin.
Did read them.
Dustin has a motion to approve the minutes from our January 25th meeting. Do we have a second on that? Second by Nancy, thank you. All those in favor say aye. Aye. And any opposed? No. And the minutes are approved. So, does anybody have anything else that they want to, I mean, it was a long meeting tonight, a lot of, normally, this is only my second year, but normally I don't think we do the school committee. I'm going to look at Jen just because I think you've been here the longest. We don't normally do the school committee in the town. And unfortunately, it had to work that way because of scheduling this year. So I appreciate everyone's, almost 2 hours of attention to that. It was a lot. I think the presenters did a good job, in condensing it and giving us what we needed to really know. And certainly, I know they all said it, but I will speak from my own experience. They are all very willing to come back should we need it, but also available offline. Should any of you have any questions, concerns, comments, you should feel free to reach out to Dr. Gilligan, Dr. Mealy, Melissa, or Lynn. They are, as I said earlier about Lynn, extraordinarily responsive. So, okay, so with that said, and bearing in mind that we are approaching quickly the 2-hour mark, go ahead, Nancy. No, it's fine, no worries.
So what is the timing for doing the write-up, just so we can kind of
Yeah,
plan?
so what I've been sort of tentatively told is that our document needs to be finalized by April 15th. So we do have, a good 6 weeks here. I will say that it will go a lot faster than we think it will. But we do. So hopefully, bearing that in mind, at the next meeting, what I would like to do is get this stuff assigned so folks can start doing it and we can get it done and out of the way.
Who takes all the pieces and puts it together? Is that you?
That'd be me. Yeah.
Fun.
That'd be me. Yeah. So and yeah, and Chris, I know helped with this last year and putting it all to one voice.
Yeah.
So Chris will be helpful in that too. Certainly, anybody who wants to volunteer can be helpful as well. But considering you're all doing sections, I don't,
However, we can't all work at it. I mean, we can't, with public open meeting law, you can only have a certain number of people working on the document at a time. So it's not like he's gonna send it around and we're all gonna make comments on it.
Right.
No, yeah, right.
We do usually see one master draft, right, and have a meeting to discuss it.
Absolutely,
So that-
for sure.
I think it's built into.
Yep, we'll do that in an open meeting so that we don't trip over any landmines. Okay.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
So, this is like one of the biggest deliverables of the Finance Committee is this document,
Yep.
right? But then, another deliverable I imagine is deciding which other warrant articles we need to make a recommendation on.
Yeah.
So when does that happen? Like, when do we know what all those other articles are? When do we discuss them? How does that process
So
work?
that's going to happen at future meetings.
Okay.
As the warrant articles are put together, a determination will be made of which ones we need to vote on and recommend or not, that'll all come in a natural sort of course. And at future meetings, as we get closer to the town meeting, we'll be able to have discussions and then ultimately vote on recommendations for those articles.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, no problem. All right, so then, I would ask for one more motion for the big adjournment.
Make it a hat trick.
Do it.
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you. So Dustin makes a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll second.
Thank you, Jen. We'll second the meeting. So all those in favor say aye. And those opposed, there better not be any. Thank you. As of 8:47 on March 2nd, the Finance Committee is adjourned.